Alan, can you hear
All
me?
right.
Fantastic. So sorry
Made it.
about the technical problem. I had you listed as a panelist and it went to the wrong address. So I
No harm.
apologize.
No harm done.
We had a number of attendees and they're just logging back in now. So to everybody, I apologize. That technical error was 100% human error on my end. But Alan's with us now, so I'm pretty excited about that. Let's just give it a second here, Alan, for people to log back in.
Sure.
I try to make it as challenging as possible for people to view my events.
That's how it should be. That's how it should be. If it's challenging to write a book, it should be challenging to come to book events.
That's exactly my point. I mean, we're all so used to Zoom at this point. You know, I'll just log in, I'll be in my pajamas, I'll watch another webinar. No, not with us. You're going to have to work for it a little bit here. Let's see, okay, 4 minutes late. That's not so bad.
That's pretty good.
I'm seeing the participants or the attendees fill up right now. So let's give it one more minute, just because people can only put up with so much of my technical errors before they bail. There's nothing good on TV right now, is there?
No.
Okay, good. Then we're in good shape. That's our one saving grace. All right. Well, listen,
start till tomorrow.
People can join us as we go. I think we've got about a dozen people and some more are popping up. So I think we're in good shape. Welcome to A Tale of Two Thrillers. I'm Jeffrey James Higgins, and I'm really honored to be here with Alan Orloff. Alan has won 2 ITW Thriller Awards. That's International Thriller Writers, a really terrific organization. He won 1 for his novel, Pray for the Innocent, which was terrific, Alan, by the way. I really like that.
Okay.
And 1 for his short story, Rent Due. I think I was actually there when he got nominated for that one. Was that the one in person a couple of years ago?
Pray for the Innocent was.
Pray for the Innocent. Yeah, I was sitting right behind you at the Thriller.
Yes, that's right.
Alan's also won the Derringer Award for his short story, Dying in Dokesville, and has had novels shortlisted for the Agatha Award and Seamus Award, as well as a story selected for the Best American Mystery Stories. Wow, that's a lot of stuff. He's published 10 books, and his latest is a young adult thriller, I Play One on TV from Down and Out Books. You can find his writing at www.alanorloff.com. By the way, Alan, I am reading I Play One on TV right now, and it's fantastic. The only reason I didn't finish it in the first night was because my schedule's been crazy.
That's right. Good job. Congratulations on that. I thank you, Jeff, for inviting me to join you. And let me just tell those who don't know Jeff. Jeffrey James Higgins is a former reporter and retired supervisory special agent who writes thriller novels, short stories, creative nonfiction, and essays. He has wrestled a suicide bomber, fought the Taliban in combat, and chased terrorists across 5 continents. He received both the Attorney General's Award for Exceptional Heroism and the DEA Award of Valor. Jeffrey has been interviewed by CNN, Investigation Discovery, Declassified, New York Times, and Fox News. His debut novel, Furious, Sailing into Terror, won a reader's favorite gold medal for medical thrillers, was a quarterfinalist in Screencraft's Most Cinematic Book Competition, and a #1 new release on Amazon. And Jeff was kind enough to give me an advance copy of Furious.
Oh, there it is.
And someone very close to me said, batten down the hatches, Higgins' electrifying debut is a page-turning thrill ride. And I thought this book was terrific, Jeff. Really just a great debut. And I hope it finds a wide audience because it was really good. And we'll talk more about it as the evening goes on.
I appreciate it.
Your current book that just came out?
Yeah, it came out about 2.5 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's called Unseen, Evil Lurks Among Us, from Black Rose Writing, and I'm looking very much forward to reading it.
It's a crime thriller, so it's a little different. Furious is more of a psychological thriller, although it bounces around a few subgenres. So I'm hoping to be able to bring the audience and the people who like Furious with me into a crime thriller. That's kind of my problem. Actually, I want to ask you about that. By the way, we have nothing really planned specifically that we want to talk about. I just enjoy talking to you about writing so much. I figure we'll just go where the conversation takes us.
Sure. And let's say if the attendees, if they want to ask questions, you can just pop them in the Q&A and we'll get to them.
Sure, the Q&A or the
chat.
I have the Q&A up. So yeah, Q&A or the chat, either one, and we'll answer them as I notice them. Of course, I've already displayed my technical abilities, so we'll see how that goes for you. So you've written 10 books. That's incredible, by the way. I mean, when did you start writing? When was like the first time you knew you wanted to be a writer?
See, probably unlike you, I never thought I would be a writer.
Really?
I was, in high school, I never liked English class. I did not like reading the so-called classics. So James Joyce, Portrait of an Artist, is something or other. I never finished. William Faulkner, the one sentence that takes like 4 pages. It's not my bag. So I would read Stephen King or Dean Koontz or Isaac Asimov. I read a lot of science fiction back then. And which was much to the consternation of my father, who was an English teacher. So when I went to college, I didn't take any English classes. I didn't have to. I was an engineer. Didn't like engineering. Went back to business school. So I never took a creative writing class ever. Never. I didn't have to. Never. I didn't like that stuff. So it wasn't until 2004, 2005, so like 15 years ago, 15, 16 years ago, where I turned to my wife and said, I think I want to try writing. And then I bent over and tried to revive her after she passed out. So I tried a few short stories, and from then, I'd written some nonfiction stuff, some newsletter kind of stuff, but I'd never written creatively. And it took a while to make the transition from writing sort of the dry, here's the information kind of thing, into writing something that is compelling and people want to read fiction-wise. So it took me a while, but I think I still haven't quite made it all the way there, but I'm working on it. How about you? Have you always wanted to be a writer?
Yeah, I ever since I was a little kid, and I think my parents read me bedtime stories, and I just think they stoked my imagination at a very early age. So I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I always thought of myself as an author. I wrote silly little books with crayons and stapling together book covers and things, and I always had a notebook going. But I took a strange twist in my career. I worked as a reporter, and I was between jobs. And while I was waiting for a new job to get funded, essentially, it was at the Middlesex News in Massachusetts. I went around the country, took a motorcycle trip around the country, and I ran out of money. And I looked in the local want ads when I was down in Florida, and I found an ad for a private investigator. And I was like, oh, this will be great for my books. I was a huge Robert Parker fan,
Oh, yeah.
So I did that when I got back to Boston. Took another job as a private investigator, and suddenly I was surrounded by all these people who were interested in law enforcement. And I'd done some investigative reporting, and I'd done some police stories when I was a journalist at a series of bi-weekly and weekly newspapers. So I was like, this is interesting. So I just do it for a little while. It turned into a lark, and then I became a cop, and then I just fell in love with it because it was a really very different thing, like being that much excitement, and every day something different. And I got into car chases and fights and shootings, and it was really interesting. And then I joined DEA, and I ended up spending 25 years in law enforcement. So in 2017, I retired and I started writing full time. And it really feels like this is what I always should be doing. I love my career in law enforcement, but this is really how I've always seen myself. And I feel like I've got so much, which is probably why I mentioned at the beginning, I kind of have these books that touch on different subgenres of thriller, but really all of my books are in a different subgenre. Furious was a psychological thriller, crime thriller for Unseen. Right now, my agent has a small town murder mystery. It takes place in the town where I grew up in Massachusetts. She's got a nonfiction book. I'm about to start editing a techno thriller that I have. So they're all thrillers, but they're different, So I think a publisher would tell me to knock it off and get into the same subgenre. What do you think about that? Do you think it matters?
I've heard the same. I have the same affliction that you have. So I just group it as all sort of crime fiction. I've written mysteries, I've written suspense, I've written thrillers, I wrote a horror novel, I've written YA, I've written, all kinds of noir, a lot of noir short stories. And the conventional wisdom says you should stick to one subgenre and build an audience. And I've had various agents say the same thing. So maybe I should start listening to them. I don't know. But you mentioned Robert B. Parker, and he was a huge influence for me too, because I had started, as I mentioned, I read a lot of horror and science fiction as a teenager and young adult. And I was working in Boston and Tewksbury, Tewksbury?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I was living in Tewksbury, working nearby. And my boss at the time said, hey, do you like to read? And I said, sure, I love to read. Well, there's a series that takes place here in Boston you might like. And he turned me on to the Spencer series. I read all his books. And a little known fact that I've written 10 books, and probably 9 of them use the Spencer template. In my mind, they're all
Really?
Spencer books, even though only one is with an actual PI. You know, they got that sidekick,
Mhm.
kind of the hawk sidekick, and he goes around, he talks to different people, goes back to them, and there's always, you know, thugs out to dissuade him from investigating, that kind of thing. So
Are your characters driven by like inner morality,
sure, so they have their own special moral code, you know.
yeah, I mean that's classic in detective fiction, but I think it's classic for the hero's journey, right? Going back into mythology, I think it's somebody who's driven by something that's not necessarily like a government sending him on a mission, or you know,
Right.
or being cast into something. It's even if he's a reluctant hero, it's being driven by your inner compass, right? And having something, doing what you believe is right. I think that's what draws a lot of people to these characters.
So in your career as a law enforcement, you probably had to play it pretty close to the book, right? You probably didn't have the opportunity to kind of follow your own moral code if it deviated from the legal system. Is that
Ellen,
fair? Or do you not want
I,
to, you don't want to incriminate yourself?
I would love to just say yes to that. Unfortunately, it couldn't be farther from the truth. You
Okay,
know,
all right.
no, I didn't violate any laws, but I was telling my wife the other day that everything I did in my career with DEA that was meaningful, I did in spite of my management. You know, like I did the first precedent-setting narco-terrorism case, and my boss at the time literally told me to drop the case, and I was like, yeah, okay. Like, and I just kept doing it. You know, I had other agencies telling us, oh, what is DEA doing investigating terrorism? There's no link between drugs and terrorism. You know, like it just, I mean, the Department of State was looking at kicking me out of Afghanistan. Like I just, my own agency almost removed me from the country because I was there on my fourth day. I wrestled a suicide bomber who was trying to blow up a bus, and they're like, "What the hell is he doing over there?" And they literally they were going to remove us, myself and my partner Tim Sellers, except the military gave us an award once they did. I think they thought it might have looked a little funny to yank us out of the country. So no, ironically, yeah, everything I did, I was at the World Trade Center on 9/11. You know, we said the 20th anniversary is kind of a day that changed the course of my life in a lot of ways. And by the way, there's no better way to bring down the mood than to mention 9/11. Well, we'll talk about cancer as soon as I get done with this, if that's okay with you. And and you know, and I just swore I was going to do something about it. So I was trying to find a way as a drug enforcement agency to get involved with counterterrorism. So I really pushed my agency into it and found like a niche where I could get to Afghanistan, where I could actually do counterterrorism work. And I had my own inspections team tell me to come to the Kabul country office and tell me to stop investigating terrorism. I mean, it just kind of goes on and on and on. You know, you have like that classic kind of rogue cop kind of, you know, thing you see in the movies and stuff.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, maybe I watched too many movies, but that kind of defined my whole career. So yeah.
So you've had these very exciting, especially for the, you know, layperson experience. Have you ever thought about taking some of those incidents and turning them into novels and stories?
Yeah, you know, I think pieces of them show up in a lot of my novels. I wrote for this techno thriller that I have. I actually wrote a first chapter that was based very heavily on something I did in the Caribbean. This operation I did with the hostage rescue team, and then I ended up pulling it because I realized it was really all backstory. But it does show up in parts of my
Yeah.
novels. And I did write a nonfiction book, which publishers are looking at right now. My agent has started submitting, and we've had some very positive feedback. So fingers crossed. It's called Blood and Powder, and it's about my experience from being at the World Trade Center on 9/11 through pushing my agency into counterterrorism to getting to Afghanistan, and then actually developing intelligence that led to the narco terrorism law, and then making the first arrest and conviction. So it's kind of this nice like plot arc.
Very cool.
It's certainly
Yeah.
a character arc too. It's that you can tell you're a writer when you start thinking about your own life in terms of character arc. You know? Like I need more conflict here.
If only he'd broken his leg, that would have helped.
Yeah, my partner did break
Too
his
bad.
leg, so that worked out well. You can have that close ally. You can have that sidekick with a broken leg.
There you go.
So I find it interesting. You said that
He's the one who takes the bullet in the shoulder for you.
that's right. It's always in the shoulder, and then they're fine in the next scene, right? You said your father, who was an English teacher, was disappointed because you were reading Stephen King and some of these other. I always find it really interesting. You know, you sort of have the literary crowd, and then you have authors who are writing things that really. I mean, Stephen King can be very literary. He has sections in some of his novels that are, I mean, just gorgeous, gorgeous, evocative language. You know, really beautiful stuff. But because it's horror, as opposed to talking about some inner struggle you had with drug addiction, they don't consider it literary fiction, right?
Well, I should clarify. I don't think my father minded that I read that stuff. I think he minded that I didn't read my class assignments.
Oh, what does that Dickens guy know? Come on.
Exactly.
I've got Salem's Lot right here. Tell me it gets better than that. So I really want to ask you a bunch of questions about this because I'm reading this book now. It's terrific. It's young adult. First off, what made you want to write young adult after some of the others? Because you've written some dark stuff.
This was not the first young adult manuscript that I've written. So I had done a couple other ones. I think I mentioned I didn't like English class, the classics, but I did a lot of reading as a kid, and I think that for many of us, the stuff that we read as kids, I mean, that sort of the teenage period was very kind of set some of your personality, if that's the right. So I think, that's why a lot of YA books are still popular with adult readers, because it brings them back to a time when, they maybe remember things fondly, or at least remember things made an impression back then. Everything was more meaningful, it seemed. So I thought that would be, I had a couple ideas that seemed to fit for the YA crowd, and they were good ideas, and it only worked with the YA, with the teenage protagonist. Now, did I play one on TV? I often get the question, well, how did I come up with this idea? I didn't. It's not my idea. I got an email from my then agent, who was just a YA expert. In fact, he's a YA author himself. And the email read something like, Alan, my wife and I, we are big watchers of those true crime reenactment shows on Investigation Discovery, for instance, which is one of your credits. Wouldn't it be cool if a teenage actor portrays a murderer as a kid, and then the murderer somehow gets out of prison and hunts this kid down? And I thought, that is a pretty fantastic premise. Now, what my agent didn't know at the time was that I have a teenage actor's son, who portrayed a skinhead murderer as a teenager on a crime reenactment show on Investigation Discovery. Oh, he had no idea that he was describing a period in my life. So I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't think of that idea myself. But, I recognize good ideas when I see them, I think. So I said, yeah, sure, it's a great idea. So I took it and ran with it. So
well, let me tell you, Alan, there's a big difference between coming up with some high concept idea and then writing a compelling novel that keeps.
Yes, thank you.
So
thank
you. I can I'm great with ideas. I can throw out about 50, 60 ideas right now. They're all pretty good, but yeah, writing it's another thing. So I wouldn't be embarrassed about that.
No. But that you just hit on, that's the difference between writers and non-writers, I think. The writers have a bazillion ideas. I have so many ideas, I cannot find time to write them all. Whereas people who maybe aren't writing or don't think in that way, they're always amazed. Oh, how could you come up with an idea, like that? And I find that question to be interesting because it's so. I have just so many ideas. It sounds like you're the same way.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear you say that. I have talked to some writers who have trouble coming up with things, and it has to sit with them for a while, and they really had and I'm not like that at all. I'm like you, like I can't read the newspaper without thinking of a new twist or novel idea. Every story I read, especially if it's something a little different, I go, huh, that's interesting, but what if, and what if this happened? And I do that all the time, so much so that I've got a list of like roughly outlined, like page-long outlines of story ideas. I think I have 75 or 80 of them now, but I keep a writer's notebook. And whenever I'm reading one of these stories, I go, oh, that's an interesting twist. That's got to be in a novel someplace. Like, even if it's not a whole plot itself, it's a piece of one. And I have hundreds of these, the things I want to just draw on. So, and I started so darn late in life because of this, 25 years in law enforcement, that I got to get these books out, so I'm doing 2 a year. But I don't know that I'll ever get through this list of book ideas I have. It's kind of frustrating. Do you feel that urgency when you're writing?
Sometimes my writing kind of goes up and down, from time to time. Or are you like me when you're driving around and you say, oh, I could hide a body there, or I could hide a body over there. Wouldn't it be cool if that, fell on somebody? And So
Yeah, I'm always coming up with like the dark side of something that could happen, or the thriller side, or but even in law enforcement, you're more aware of your surroundings too, right? You're always looking for things, and you're always
okay,
stumbling upon things, and so that that definitely translates. I think writers and people who are like investigators have that in common. I think they're always looking for people's other motives, or what's really going on behind the scenes.
yeah, exactly.
So when you're writing young adult, and by the way, the reason I think it's a really interesting point you make, that it's because that's the time in people's lives that they're forming who they are. So it is this kind of special time. I hadn't thought of that. That might be, as a reader, like why readers are drawn to that. That might be it. I know for me, like I was always a voracious reader as a kid. I was reading adult books when I was really young, and in even going through like all the young adult books, right? Hardy Boys, those kinds of things with like teenage
Mhm.
characters. But it was the excitement, it was the imagination, and being able to, think about like these other worlds that exist, or what would happen if you're not in suburbia, but you're in this war zone, right? Like it was a way to transport yourself into like this fantasy. And so I think when I read young adult, it reminds me of that. It reminds me of the way I felt when I was reading
Yes,
books
yes,
at that age.
exactly,
Did you
exactly.
find?
And I also think that, now, I read so much crime fiction. I rarely come upon a new plot or a new situation, but back then everything was new. So I remember those books, I think in general, a lot more than I remember books that I read, just a few weeks ago. But so I think that plays into it as well.
Yeah, I think you're right, because it's all new to you at that time. But it's the high concept. I've changed, because you grow as a writer all the time. So I've really changed. Like I have all these ideas, but if it's not an idea that I can tell you in like one sentence that really hooks you, if it's not, wow, that's interesting. If I don't get that wow factor, I don't think I want to take the time to write it. Because a lot of people, I mean, I'm just looking at the attendees list here. We have a bunch of writers here, but some other people who aren't writers. I don't think they realize how long it takes. Like I can bang out a draft if I'm writing full time, a couple thousand words a day. I can do a first draft in a month and a half, but then it takes me at least 3 or 4 months of heavy editing. Then there's beta readers, and I have a critique group I bounce stuff off of. Then over and over and over again. Then an agent, and it takes forever. And then it seems like the more you write, even through the editorial process, the better you get, right? So like it's almost an unending process, because you're a better writer at the end of 3 or 4 edits than you were at the beginning. So when you look at it with fresh eyes again, right, you come up with new stuff. Does that happen to you?
Oh yeah, sure, sure. And like you said, it takes so long that you kind of need to be careful about these ideas, which is I think the point you're trying to get to, that you want to make sure that it's a high concept idea that maybe hasn't been done in the same way you're going to do it before, because you're going to spend a year with this book and then hopefully more promoting it and so on. That you don't want it to be just another ho hum. I've seen this a million times kind of thing. So
And would you say, so are you more or plot driven or character driven? Because I've seen people who say that, but well, the character is what sticks with people. But to be honest, like I love Michael Crichton, right? And his characters are somewhat two dimensional in a lot of his books, but his plots are amazing. So I think I can be just as taken by a plot as I can an iconic character like a Harry Bosch.
yeah, yeah. In fact, sometimes I get the question, what book do you wish you would have written? And I automatically, it's like Jurassic Park. What a great concept. I mean, oh my God, that's amazing. So I love Crichton too, but some of his later work, you're right. He's a plot guy. He's a plot guy. He's not a prose guy. He's not a character guy. He's a plot guy. For me, character and plot go hand in hand. One kind of drives the other. You got to have fully formed characters and compelling situations. So it's I think each book, each idea might start with a spark from either, oh, I've got a great character, oh yeah, this is what I'll end up doing, or he or she will end up doing. Or sometimes I'll have a plot and say, oh, this is the perfect character to work on this plot. So it goes both ways. I don't know. How about for you?
Yeah, I think so. I think you have to have both. I think you really have to have the high concept plot, though. You can have an interesting character, and there are certainly books that are just completely about that character that have stuck with people for 100 years. But in general, I think you want to start with a good plot, and I think that's what, like, especially in thrillers, in our genre, thrillers, mysteries. What the actual plot is, what someone's seeking, what the conflict is. I think that's at maybe probably more important. But then, of course, your characters have to be decent. And like hey, you mentioned Jurassic Park. That may be the best thriller ever written, right? It's like I remember, I read it a couple of times and just reading it, and every chapter they resolve something and then they get into worse trouble and the stakes just keep going up and up and up and the pace keeps getting faster and faster and faster. I mean, it's really, if you just look at the way he ends his chapters, it's like a master course.
You know who else does a great job of doing that with putting their characters in more and more danger and peril and stuff? You do. And Furious,
Thank you.
that was probably the one takeaway that I had was, oh my God, I'm reading this thing and it's like, this is really good. This is really good. What can happen next? And something even more terrible happened. And then I'm like, okay, how's it going to get out of this? And then the next thing is even worse. And I'm like, oh, this is great. It was really great. And I think that, as you mentioned, in the thriller subgenre, a lot of that is pacing. I think pacing, it might be the most important sort of fundamental in a thriller, different than in a mystery or in a noir. But really, I think pacing is maybe the one thing that defines a thriller more than anything else.
I think you're right, and I mean, I think it's interesting the difference between mysteries and thrillers, right? I actually, Unseen, the book that's out now, I originally wrote it as a mystery, and I was calling it a mystery thriller. I mean, sometimes it's hard to parse exact, but it was a mystery, like who did this, right? And then when I finished it, it was okay. The characters needed work, so I went in and I changed the characters completely, but it fell a little flat for me, and so I went back and I did this huge edit, and I changed it from a mystery to a thriller. So in Unseen, the reader is ahead of the protagonist for the whole book, which I think is one of the elements of a thriller, right? You know what's going to happen, it's bad, and you're hoping he can catch up and stop things as they happen, right? But for me, like I think maybe that goes more to my experience or goes more to like my personality, but I think I can write that better than I can actually write the whodunit. I mean, all thrillers have some element of mystery, and they, there's lots of questions that need to be answered and everything. But like a classic whodunit, I just had even my, my red herrings and everything. They were there, but I didn't think they were convincing. So I just completely did that. Have you ever done that? Have you ever changed genre like that?
I don't know that I've changed genre, but I'm totally there with you about the puzzle part of a mystery with the clues. I find that to be very difficult, and I'm not sure I do a great job with it. So some of my books are mysteries, but they're really more suspense. I mean, there's a mystery and it's a whodunit, but in my head when I'm writing it, I'm not so. I mean, I try to do a good job with the puzzle and the clues and everything, but I think ultimately they come out more suspense thrillery.
You do a great job with the clues. I mean, you pull it off very well. But I actually like that you characterize them more as suspense, because to me that's what drives me through a book. Like it's the level, the feeling you have, the level of suspense. Like a traditional like British murder mystery, I find those kind of boring, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I mean, I used to teach workshops at the Writers Center in Bethesda, and we would talk about the difference between mysteries and thrillers. And mysteries were generally more cerebral. You're trying to figure out this puzzle, whereas the thrillers hit the emotional beats. I mean, and then that's exactly what you're saying. And I'm the same way. I mean, a good mystery is fun. You go through, but it doesn't get the blood racing and the heart pounding the same way as a good thriller does. So, I mean, there's time and place for both, and luckily readers embrace both. Some readers like this, some readers like this, some readers like both, depending what kind of mood you're in. So there's room for everybody at the crime fiction feeding trough. But I think especially lately, most of mine have veered more in the thriller subgenre.
It's interesting because it is a spectrum, right? So some of the stuff I'm writing, like my techno thriller, has an element of mystery and there's a lot of twists in it, but it's also, it's definitely more thriller. But how would you rate something like Presumed Innocent? Right, that's a murder mystery. Guy's accused of a murder, right? And then you're kind of going through the whole thing. Did he do it? Did he not do it? So
I'll call that a legal thriller.
Okay, that's a cop
So
out.
it's a thriller. I mean, like you said, the lines are muddied, and I don't, again, I didn't grow up writing. I didn't know anything about it. I would go to the library and just look for books that were good, that I thought were going to be good. I didn't look for, oh, I'm in the mood for a mystery. I'm in the mood for a thriller. I'm in the mood for a legal book. I would go, and if it sounded interesting, I would read it. As a writer, they sort of force you, meaning agents, editors, bookstores, whomever, they want to put you in a little slot so that they can market and sell the book. And I totally get that. And that's great. But when I'm sitting down to write something, I have an idea. I don't know that I always make the distinction whether this is going to be a mystery, I'm not going to make it suspenseful, or this is going to be a thriller, so I'm not going to have clues. I just sort of write the story as I think it should be written, put a label on it, and hope that it flies.
I've heard that from a lot of authors, and their publishers like, okay, or their agent, how are we gonna position this? And it's sort of like, well, it's suspense, but it's it's a thriller. Like it really,
and it's historical, and there's some swordplay in there, and there's a little bit of science fiction, and this dystopian, and it's really it's a romance, right? Like that.
right, and there can be elements of all that. And don't you think it's sort of an anachronism? Like I understood, 15 years ago, they had to know which shelf to put it on in Barnes and Noble, right? But now, I mean, there's like, I think Amazon is about 50% of all book sales, but like 70+% of digital book sales. So it's not necessarily a bookshelf. It can be tagged with mystery and thriller, and it can have all these tags in it, so it pops up based on people's searches. Do you feel like we're getting kind of stuffed into like these kind of restrictive categories where maybe it doesn't really apply anymore?
Well, yeah, I mean, when you put a book up on, and I've had to reissue some books that went out of print, so I've self-pubbed a few titles. And when you do that, you have to pick the categories. And they have a whole bunch of categories, and they don't always have one that fits perfectly. So you sort of, well, is this a traditional sleuth mystery? I'm like, I don't know. So I think that some readers do look for specific things. I know some people like cozy mysteries, for instance. So they want a book that's a cozy mystery, and they don't want to have a thriller pop up when they do a search for cozy mysteries. So I get that these books need to be tagged and labeled and sorted in certain ways. It feels a little constrictive as an author, that I've written this great thriller, for instance, and maybe there is a romance in there. Maybe someone who likes to read romance would like it, but they're never going to find you if it's in the thriller bucket.
I think you're certainly right with like cozy, something that has such specific conventions and reader expectations. But when you get more into like classic kind of thrillers or mystery / thrillers, I think it muddies the water a little bit.
Maybe, but okay. So I'll ask you this: when you go to a library, for instance, they have general fiction, and they'll often have mysteries.
Right.
There's not a separate thriller section.
Right.
I find that bizarre. Now, and if you look in the mysteries, there'll be some thrillers, but if you look in the general fiction, there'll be a lot of thrillers, but probably not too many mysteries. Right. And to me, like I said, when I go to the library or the bookstore, I'm just looking for a good book. So I have to look in two places. I mean, I'm not necessarily looking for mystery, but mysteries are good too. So I just find it's based on something that you're right, that was done many years ago, and it's still sort of the vestige carries through. But I don't know.
We just entered Unseen into a contest, and they didn't have a thriller. It was thriller with action, and then mystery with something else. Like, it was so weird. It was like, I'll just check all of the above, like I used to do on my tests in high school.
How can you have a thriller without action?
Well, you can have action, but if I'm thinking about like I want to get a book, an action book can be very different than if I'm looking for a mystery. But what if it's crime fiction? Like, why not just have, sometimes you see the separate crime category, which kind of has a little bit of both in it. But where do you put like a crime thriller that has action but also has a homicide to solve?
Yeah.
So I read a book, I think it was a couple of years ago. I hadn't read much Dean Koontz, but he's obviously one of the biggest writers in the world. And I think he's written like 1.5 billion titles.
I think that's right. Give or take 100 million.
It seems about right. But it was called Intensity. Have you read this book?
Yes, I think it was published with he had a bunch of pen names back in the day. Was that a Lee Nichols? It might have been originally published as Lee Nichols,
I don't know. I read it fairly recently, but it was probably 20 years old or something.
but I'll look that
But
up.
it's the most aptly named book I've ever seen. It is the most intense thriller. I think if I had to pick one thriller like that's the best, I would pick that. If anybody hasn't read that yet, it grabs you from the beginning and it just doesn't let go the whole time. It was the only book I've ever put down for a second because I was feeling breathless from it. This is literally the only time that's ever happened to me. It's crazy.
So Dean Koontz, I don't know. I mean, I said I didn't want to be a writer, but many years ago, I did read a book by Dean Koontz, How to Write a Best-Selling Thriller, I think it was called, or something. And you can't find that book anymore. It's way out of print. You can't hunt it down. And he had some very interesting things. One of he had a pragmatic thing where he always names his main characters like with V's and K's because they're very hard sounding consonants. And I just looked up intensity to see if I could find out if he wrote it as Lee Nichols. And the murderous sociopath is called Edgecler Foreman Vess. And that's so I use in some of my stories, I still use that. I have like V's and K's and weird, like really hard sounding consonants for my bad guys. So for those who are watching, you can tell a bad guy based on the name if you pay attention to some of my books.
That's really interesting. I've read a ton of books on craft, but I haven't seen that one by him. So now I'm gonna have.
You can't find it. You won't find it. I don't know whether he was embarrassed because this was before he was like a huge name or something. I don't know.
Whatever he said in that book, my advice would be just follow that because
that's what
it seems like it's worked pretty well for him. That kid's gonna make a name for himself. So tell me a little bit about your writing process. I'm sure you've been asked this a lot, but it's always interesting to me. I was just at Creatures, Crimes, and Creativity. It's a C3 conference by Intrigue Publishing in Maryland. And it's Austin Camacho's conference. It does a really terrific job. It's always local writers. Everybody there is mystery, thriller. There were some fantasy, sci-fi, but it's all like genre fiction. Everybody's process is different. It's crazy to me. Yeah, people are turning out. We all suffer the same things, but yet we all get to from A to B in a different path. What tell us about yours?
Sure. I mean, if you ask 10 writers how they write, you'll get 15 different answers, right? I generally take okay. So here's kind of my strategy. I'll come up with an idea, and like I said, I've got all these million different ideas. So the ideas that stay with me, that I never forget, that are just eating at me, those are the ones I pursue. So I'll decide on an idea. I try to make sure that it's marketable or big enough or something that I have the skill to write. And then I'll take about a week and I'll sort of map out. I'm a plotter. I plot things out. So I outline sort of how I see the novel going, and I'll do character sketches for some of the main characters so I get to know them a little better if I need to. It takes about a week, and then I'll kind of look ahead and say, all right, I want to have this first draft done in 2 months or 3 months or whatever, and I'll back it up and do a quota, a daily quota. I write 5 when I'm in writing mode. I'll write 5 days a week, and I'll just so if my books are generally about 80,000 words, so that's like 16 weeks, right? For 1,000 words a day. Is that right? 5,000, 16, yeah, 5,000. So say it's whatever it is. So I sit down and I just start typing. When I get my quota, I'll just stop typing and move on to some other stuff. I'm sure I have other stuff to do. Sometimes I'll get up in the middle of a sentence if things aren't really going that great. So what that means is after 2 months or 3 months, I will have a rough draft. Now I don't go back while I'm writing this. I don't go back and edit. So if I change a character's name in like the 3rd chapter, and I change it again in the 6th chapter, and if I were to hand that draft 0 to someone to read it, they would think I was losing it because I'd have, well, who are these characters? Oh, that's the main character. Well, he was named Jim in the first, the first part of the book. Yeah, I changed his name. So I don't go back and do it, which leaves me with quite a mess when I'm done. But at least I've typed those 2 magical words at the end, And then I can see what the story is supposed to be or the shape it's supposed to take. And invariably, like maybe the first 2 chapters won't need to be there. And I've worked with so many students who, they'll write the first chapter and they'll rewrite it and they'll revise it and they'll polish it and it'll be great. So they got their first chapter and they'll go into the second chapter and they'll work on it and they'll write it and they'll revise it and they'll polish it. And it's great, but whatever they've done necessitates a change in the first chapter. So they go back to the first chapter and they work it again or revise it or polish it, tweedle a little bit on the second chapter based on what they've just changed in the first chapter, and then they'll go into their third chapter. So as you can imagine, a year goes by and they've only made it to chapter 5. And when they get to the end, they realize, oh, my book doesn't really start until chapter 3 anyway. So they've wasted all this time spinning the wheels, working on something that and they don't see the big picture of the book until much later. So that works for me. Now, I realize it probably doesn't work for many people. I think the key is to find a system or a method that works for you, and then stick with that, and then refine it with each book. Each book you said you learn to be a better writer. Well, your process probably also improves as well, not just the words on the page, but the writing process. So through the years, through the many manuscripts I've written, my process is I've tried to streamline it even more and kind of realize that I don't need to be so perfect the first time through, just get the words down. I'll go through and instead of doing some esoteric research that'll throw me out of my rhythm, out of my zone, I'll just put XXX, and then when I'm done, I'll search on XXX and do the research and so on. So that's how I do it. How do you do it?
Pretty similar to you. I think it's interesting you say, I think when people do what your students were doing and going back and revising and then changing and revising, I think the other danger to that is you can get wedded to the material, because if you polish it that many times, it's probably pretty good. Like your prose is probably excellent. You've created some things and it's so hard to cut, but it's really easy to cut something that's garbage. Right. So I do it.
Amen. Amen,
I write
brother.
from the beginning to the end because I want to see, does this work as an arc, right? Is the plot moving? Is the pace? And if I'm not writing in a row, I can't sense the pace, because if I'm sitting there for a long time, what the heck did I write, 2 chapters ago, and I'd have to go back and read. And I'm a big plotter too. I outline like crazy, and I try before I start to spend a few weeks outlining. I work on the characters. I think a lot about the characters, and of course they're going to change as I'm writing, but I do a ton of work in advance. I do a ton of research in advance. So when I can start writing, I can basically just plow through. And I've done a NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writing Month in November. I've done it 3 times and completed complete books each time in the month.
Wow.
And then, gone back and added chapters and cut chapters and then done tons and tons of editing. But to me, that really works to drive myself through. But I've also tried to like pants my way, like go in with no real plan. I had a sequel to Furious, and I knew the ending and I knew the basic plot, but they did this camp NaNoWriMo and someone had invited me to do it. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds fun. I'll do it. And I went in there without an outline and it was excruciating. Like I worried about my word count every day. Like it was terrible. Like I did not enjoy the writing at all. Like it was horrible. And I hit the 50,000 in a month, but it was just awful. Like, and so I promised myself I would never do that again. So
I've tried to pants too, and it is, if you're not a pantser, if you are, an organized outline or whatever, pantsing is, it's scary.
yeah.
It's frightening. I'm like, this is going to be trash, and you know what? It was.
Yeah.
I was right. It's trash.
And I think we're all writers are the same in the sense that if you're pantsing, you're working with the character, you're seeing where they go, you're coming up with ideas, you're running down dead ends, then throwing out, the 30,000 words and doing something else. And if you're an outliner, you're doing all that too, but you're doing it in your head and you're thinking about it with notes and just outline form. So we're both doing the same thing. I think some people, like if I'm pretty organized, and that's how I think. It's just kind of, I think like the outline, and points, and there's the arc, and this is Act 2, and I'll have this change in value in these scenes, and this this subplot running through, and I'll make little diagrams and things, and so I can do that easier at the beginning than I can like letting the characters come to life. And then of course once I start writing, I realize I've gone in completely different directions. Like characters have just started, and I'm like, wait a minute, that wasn't my idea. And then do you go back and stick to your idea,
Oh,
or
you
do
change the
you just
outline.
run with the character?
Change the outline.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm basically lazy. So I don't want to just pants and then write even 5,000 words that I got to take out. That's like, forget that. That's like, that's a week's worth of writing. I'm going to make sure that I get as close to my vision as possible. And that's what when I sit down, I develop a vision for this book. And that's sort of how I measure my own success. How close did I get to the vision of my book? Because it's not always, I mean, you might have a great vision, but when you actually write the thing out, it doesn't always match. I don't know if you're the same way.
Sure.
Most of the books probably fall a little short of the vision because, 80,000 words later, it's different than having that high concept vision. But on those rare occasions where the book exceeds your vision, that's pretty cool. So on Pray for the Innocent, I would say that it kind of exceeded my vision on that one. And I wrote that horror novel that I mentioned, The Taste, that exceeded my vision. So and maybe not coincidentally, those were the two books I had the most fun writing. Those were really, I don't know whether it was the premise or the fact that the idea was really crystallized in my head. Because even if you have an outline, sometimes the outline's a little murkier than others. And the murkier, the more unsure you are, the more difficulty I have writing it. But when that outline is crystal clear and at the second to last scene, this is going to happen and it's going to be awesome, and you're writing to that scene, for me, it works easier.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think the other thing you can do is in the editorial process, it's pretty easy to go through and look to make sure like you have rising tension, to look to make sure that you're, ending with some kind of cliffhanger to keep the reader turning pages, to make sure there's changes in value with the character too, right? Yeah, there has to be some significant change in a character if it's a standalone. By the way, all your books are standalones, right? Have you written a series? You haven't, right?
I have two books in a very short series. I wrote for Midnight Ink, I wrote Killer Routine, and the next one, Deadly Campaign. And they're both about a stand-up comic who solves murders, because all stand-up comics solve murders. But the rest are standalones. And by standalones, for me, it just means they're not a series yet. A lot of those standalones are sort of, could be series or positioned to be first book in a series. A lot of those decisions are mine, they're publishers' decisions. So
I had a publisher ask me about the small town murder mystery that I have out now. Hey, could this be a series? I was like, absolutely, it's a series.
That is the absolute correct answer too.
Yeah, I have so many different ideas, so I want to get to all of them. But I had a publisher a couple of years ago who told me, I was pitching a book to him, which he eventually turned down. But he said he doesn't know how anybody can make any money, especially as like a newer author, without a series. Without being able to have people fall in love with those characters and then bring them to the next book. And I think there's plenty of authors who prove that's not true, but I think it can also be true more often than that.
I think in crime fiction, a lot of editors are in fact looking for series. I had, before I sold Pray for the Innocent to Amazon Publishing, there was another larger pal, I mean, not larger than Amazon, but another large house expressed interest. And it was like, well, is there a second book in the series? And I'm like, well, yeah, but actually Pray for the Innocent is pretty much I mean, it's more of a standalone than maybe any of my other books. I mean, it's pretty much standalone. But it can be a series. So I developed some other idea, and they didn't go for it. So they didn't buy the book because they wanted a series.
I mean, it is tempting, right, to write a series, and in some ways it's easier. I think it can be a little more boring if you get locked into something, but what a great problem to have, right? You have a book with a series that's selling, but also just to be able to, jump. What I've looked at is I've looked at a few of my books and I've looked at which one of these could use the same characters, because I have all these ideas and I do have 4 or 5 that could certainly be the same like special agent character. And so I'm considering doing a series next. I'm waiting to see how Unseen sells, and if it does well, I might continue a couple of characters in that because I
I
have
think
books out.
I think the ideal situation would be to have a series and then kind of alternate. Maybe every third book is a standalone, like Laura Lippman. She had the Tess Monahan series, and then it was standalones. Every once in a while, we still get another Tess Monahan book, or Robert Crace with the Ellis Cole, Joe Pike, but he's written, he's filtered in some standalones as well, and a lot of other writers do that too.
How
Yes, I just put my name in with Laura Lippman and Robert Craze.
That's excellent. It belongs there. So your writing is fantastic. I tell you, I get a comfort when I read your work because the craft is just there, and it's in so many other books, little things, especially when you write, start to bother you. Like, I mean, everyone would say, oh, I wouldn't do this that way. I do it this way, whatever. But so it's that style, but things that I don't think are right, like really bother me now. And when I read yours, I just relax because it's really well written, and I know you're not gonna. I know you're gonna keep the plot moving. I know you're gonna resolve things. I know the characters are gonna come to the right changes, and there's going to be surprises in there, and a little bit of humor too. You have a great sense of humor. How are you able to balance the humor with the thriller genre? Right?
Yeah, that's pretty hard. I like to write books that I want to read, and if I pick up a book, or even if I'm in a one-on-one discussion with someone and they seem to have no sense of humor, I just sort of tune out. I mean, I need that humor. So when I pick up a book to read, I look for those humorous situations. That doesn't have to be like fall down, slap your knee funny, but just to know that the characters sort of have themselves have sort of maybe a sardonic worldview, or there's something to them that's not just dead serious the whole time.
Well, we talked about Spencer for Hire, right? Spencer certainly has a sense of humor.
Absolutely. And again, that's sort of the template for a lot of it just got stuck in there, and now I just regurgitate it every chance I can. So that's what I do when I try to write. I try to find opportunities to put humor in where it doesn't sort of mess up the pacing or whatever. I mentioned my 2-book series with the stand-up comic. I figured I really wanted to explore the dark side, sort of that narrow divide between comedy and tragedy. A lot of the famous stand-up comics just have led tragic lives and just are so messed up, but yet they're funny. So I thought that would be cool to explore.
Well, they kill on stage.
No. Okay.
It's late.
Yeah, it is. No, well done. But as in writing it, I put probably there's more humor in those books than in some of my other books, but they're still not funny. Now I envy a writer who can write funny, because writing funny is really hard to sustain. I mean, I've written some funny short stories, but to do that for like Donna Andrews, I'm sure you know Donna, right? She has just a hilarious series. It's like 25 books long, Meg Langslow series. And she just, every book is just as funny as the last book, and funnier. I mean, she just has a great sense of humor. I think I would fail miserably if I tried to write something funny from start to finish.
I think it has to be a funny book, right? Like if there's too much in it, it's hard to maintain the sense of suspense or the sense of dread. I think using it here and there to break the tension, give the reader a break, let him take a breath. I think that's helpful. I tend to forget to do that, and the things get too intense. But I definitely think it has a place. I find you're a funny guy, and you do work humor into your work. So I think it's a delicate balance, and you do a pretty good job.
It is. Thanks.
So I noticed this latest book is set in Northern Virginia. How do you pick your locations for these things?
I mentioned that I'm lazy, so I don't like to do a lot of research. So I pick places where I lived or I visited. So most of my books take place in Northern Virginia. My horror book takes place in of course, West Virginia. It's about cannibalism, so I
Nice.
figured out natural.
I haven't read that one yet. I'm really interested now to find that. I'll throw that.
It's pretty cool if you don't mind. A lot of the reviews are like, I thought this book was going to be so disgusting, and it was, but it was really good anyway. I really enjoyed it, even though it was disgusting. I mean, it's like that. So,
I had a woman who reviewed Furious, and she said, "Oh, the writing was really good and the plot was terrific, but I don't like thrillers," and so she gave me 3 stars.
well, that that was one of the better books I read that year. It was last year, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Furious was that's a book that it's stayed with me. Like I said, I read a lot, and a lot of the books go in one ear. They're good. They go out the other ear, fine. But and I just like I like a sea based story. So I like Jaw. I like Peter Benchley's books.
Oh my God, I love those.
I like. Do you like Steve Alton? The Meg series. Have you read those?
No, I haven't read them.
Megalodon, giant sharks.
They made a movie of them, right? I saw there was a movie Meg I saw years ago. But
those are good. Some of the 47 meters down the movie or something. Anyway.
Oh yeah, no, I saw that movie too. Yeah, anything with a boat in it, I've probably seen.
Yeah, those are great. So I really liked your book. So.
Oh, thank you so much. Hey, we have a question here from Colleen Kenny. Said, this was wonderful. Working on a novel will likely self-publish. Once you reach the end, do you set the work aside for a period of time before you go into the edit, refine process? Stephen King says, don't even look at it for a month. Or do you finish a manuscript and go straight to the editing process? And where do you get the book cover posters? You do have great posters, Alan. You want to take that?
I'll take the last part. You can start the first part.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely set it aside when I finish. I try to do that quick thing where I get the whole arc down, so I know, okay, this works as a novel. There's an ending. There's a 3 or 4 acts. It works together, and then as soon as I set it aside for at least 2 weeks, and I just work on something else. I clear my head. Then I go back and I read it, and what I find is that 2 weeks allows me to come back more as a reader than as a writer. And I've written it so quickly, 80, 90,000 words in like 5 or 6 weeks, that when I get through it, like I often surprise myself because I don't remember writing, because I was writing, 2,000 or 2,500 words a day. So it's fun, but taking a step aside also really shows you like the glaring plot holes and the pacing issues. So totally recommend that. And I'll even do it, like I go through all these editing iterations, like many, and it's getting better because my writing's getting better. But at the beginning, I'd go through like 50 times. Like I'd go through the book so many times. Now it's maybe 7 or 8 times. But each time is like, I'll do a character edit. I'll go through, I'll just make sure the plot, like a structural edit to make sure everything's holding together. Then I'll do craft edits, and then I'll do a paper copy. Then I'll read it out loud. And like I do, in each one shows different things. So I try to do a lot of editing for it, but at the end I set it aside, and then I work on something else, and then I come back to it and I just read it. And I often, I keep finding error after error. So it never ends. But yeah, Colleen, I definitely recommend setting it aside. I think Stephen King's book on writing pointed that out, and he's got some great advice in there. What about the posters, Alan?
The posters, they're canvas wraps, and I got them at Costco. They're
really?
like $50. I do them for all my book covers. So I've got them up on the wall there. See all the different.
That's fantastic.
My office.
You're gonna have to get a bigger room at this rate.
Well, we got a high ceiling. You can't see. But I will echo what Jeff said. They'll tell you, the people writing these how to write books, they tell you to set aside your novels for a while, as long as you can really stand it. And they also tell you to read your book out loud. And I should do both of those more than I do. But they're really helpful to, because you think about it in different ways. And Jeff, you said you print out a book and do a paper read. That's yet another way that your brain processes it different, I'm convinced. So you'll catch different things when you proof it on screen versus when you proof it on paper, or when you read out loud and it goes through your ears. Just you process it differently and different things stick out. And like you, Jeff, I do a different edit pass for different things. I'll do it, like first I'll do a plot, because the plot has to stick together in a thriller and a crime fiction. That's the kind of the key. And then I'll go through on the major characters, and if one guy because I just write from beginning to end and I go back and edit, some of my characters might be like, say, snarky at the beginning and way less snarky at the end. So I gotta even that out, right? Because you gotta have the same kind of characters. And then I'll do the different passes for different characters or plots or pacing, if it's a thriller. And I wait till the very last to do some kind of a spell check and the crutch words. You search on all your pretty and little, all your crutch words to kind of eliminate those, because you don't want to cut them, and then add a bunch of stuff in and have to go through again. So do that kind of minutia. Wait to the very end. That's my suggestion.
Those are great. That's great advice. I would also I use Pro Writing Aid, which is like editing software, and it has a lot of reports that do some of the things you were talking about. It also looks for like echoes where you have the same word in close proximity, or overused words, or like boring sentence length where all your sentence lengths are the same or paragraph lengths are the same. I do that all at the end too, because you're right. It can change a lot.
I have an app for that. It's called My Wife. She reads it.
Fantastic. Yeah, my wife is my first reader, and I write all my stuff for her too. Well, listen, Alan, this has been fantastic. I could literally just talk to you for hours and hours. Oh, hold on, one more. We have a question here. We'll answer this, and then I just want to ask you where we can find your book, and then we'll get out of here. This is from Ann Carlisle. Do you have the same person that designs your book covers?
Well, my book covers are, typically a book cover is done by the publisher, and us as authors have very little input. In fact, my first cover, I don't know if you can see, is Diamonds for the Dead. So it's the one kind of gray-green with the Russian nesting doll. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
I absolutely hated it.
Really?
It's terrible. Terrible. The colors are bad. The titles are crooked. There's a blurry rack focus, they call it. There's just some graphics that make no sense whatsoever. It was my first book. It was my debut. So I open the email, I look at it like, I'm not a crying man, but I was almost in tears. It was, because this is your first book, right? And covers matter. Covers matter. They matter a lot. So I was distraught. I called my agent and said, oh my God, what can we do? She's like, well, probably not a whole lot. So I bulletized a list, about 10 or 12 things I didn't like with this cover. And I said, let's call the editor. So my agent and we called the editor, and I went through all the things, and he kind of explained their thinking. And I said, so? And he goes, no, we're not going to make any changes. That's what marketing likes.
Brutal.
We don't get to make our covers generally, but because I am reissuing those, I've retained the rights. I've gotten the rights back for those books and a couple other books. I am reissuing them. You'll see them next month. And I hired someone to do all the covers to look similar. So I'm trying to consolidate my brand into more of a thriller look. Mm-hmm. So they'll look more like Pray for the Innocent, with the same lettering and font and Running from the Past. They'll all sort of take that form. So if you self-publish, you can get the same person you can hire the same person to do all your covers and make them look uniform, if that's what you want.
Yeah, your new covers are fantastic. I think that's a great idea. I think a lot of people don't realize that the marketing departments of these publishers drive everything now, from what titles are acquired to obviously how they're going to market them, but what the covers look like. They drive all of that, the whole strategy. So a lot of acquiring editors don't have the same say that they used to. I know mine are through Black Rose Writing, and David King is their design guy, and he's terrific. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, I have this great idea, I'm going to design my own cover. I really recommend against that, because it's an art form, and it's not even like, oh, I know this like talented artist will do it for me. It's its own art form. And covers are like 30% of like something like that, roughly 30% of the decision of people, the decisions, how they decide what they're going to read next are based on covers. You have to pick it up. You have to know the genre by looking at it. You have to have an idea of the tone, and it has to draw you in, something that is interesting, So your covers behind you certainly do that, but I would definitely never take it on myself to try to design something. So Alan, This has been terrific. I really enjoyed talking to you. We should do this again sometime. I could talk to you for hours.
What are you doing tomorrow night?
Let's do it. So where I play one on TV is fantastic. I personally recommend it. It's a terrific book. Where can our readers find it?
You can get it at Down and Out on their website. You can call your local bookstore if they don't stock it. They'll be glad to order it. I imagine you can go online and get a copy. And it's available in ebook and print, all the platforms. And how about Unseen? Where can we?
It's through Black Rose Writing. It's on Barnes and Noble. It's on Amazon. You can ask your local library to pick it up. It's in all the catalogs. It's not in many bookstores, but you can always ask your local bookstore to carry it. It's in the catalogs, and they can pick it up.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of books that bookstores don't carry by just, what's the word I'm looking for? Automatically,
right.
But they'll all order them for you. So that's not an issue. Yeah.
Right. So support your local bookstores.
So what's next for you, Jeff?
I'm just wrapping up a serial that I did on Amazon Vella. They're big internationally, but not so big domestically. And so I'm on the last episode, actually. I'll finish it tomorrow, then do some editing. But the first, I think 13 episodes are up. I just wanted to do it as an experiment. It was fun. I don't know that it'll draw a big audience. And then I'm going to go back and I'm going to edit my techno thriller. And then of course my agent's shopping a nonfiction and a thriller. So hopefully we'll land a contract for one of those in the next couple of months. What's your next project?
Well, like you, my agent's shopping a couple things. I just finished a novella for a series called Guns and Tacos. I don't know if you've seen that. It's a noir series, and that'll be out next year sometime. And I've got a couple of short stories that, let's see, I brought some show and tell here. One is in Murder by the Glass, that just came out.
Oh, nice.
And I think that's probably what I got. One came out in the Bouchicon anthology called This Time for Sure, which.
You are prolific. I don't know how you write this many novels and do short stories at the same time. I have a lot of novel ideas that'll probably end up being short stories just so I can get the idea out there.
Just when you get to 5,000 words, just stop typing and write the end. People love those ambiguous endings.
Yeah, I'll let my agent know that's what you told me to do. It's not my fault. All right, Alan, listen, thank you. I want to thank everybody who tuned in for this. We'll put the recording up on our platforms. I'll get that out in the next couple of days to you. And we just appreciate all the support, and go get Alan's book. It's fantastic.
Go get Jeff's books, both of them. I can't wait to read the new one. Thanks for inviting me, Jeff. This was fun. And thanks to all the people that stuck with us for an hour.
Great. Take care, everybody.
All right.
All right. Bye.